I ended my marriage while I still loved my husband because he was already ending me, not with a gun, not with poison, with a plan. My name was at the top of his list, every bullet point a step to erase me. My job, my friends, my life. I let him think I was blind. I smiled. I served him dinner. I kissed him goodnight. And then, one message lit up his phone. She'll never see this coming. They were right, I didn't. But when I struck back, neither did he. Dinner that night was silent enough to hear the cutlery scrape against porcelain. We sat across from each other like strangers who'd been forced to share a table in a restaurant neither of us wanted to be in. His fork moved in small mechanical motions, eyes locked on the black reflection of the muted TV across the room. My glass of wine caught the same reflection, only in mine. There was an extra shape standing just over his shoulder. I didn't look directly at it. I'd learned not to. My phone sat on the table beside my plate, face up, screen dark. His was face down, shoved halfway under his folded napkin. When it vibrated, he didn't flinch. The second vibration was longer, more insistent. Still, he didn't move. He just reached over, turned it off, and slipped it into the front pocket of his hoodie with a casualness so rehearsed it was almost an insult. "You need to trust me," he said, suddenly not looking up. The words dropped between us like a coin into deep water. No splash, just a slow sinking. I thought about the line I'd overheard the day before drifting out from his office. While he was on a video call, he forgot to mute, "She'll never see this coming." At the time, I'd told myself it was about work, maybe some marketing strategy. But sitting here now, I could feel the echo of those words against my ribs. I've always been a pattern spotter. Risk analyst professionally trained to see the thing that doesn't fit. Raised by a single mother who told me to keep every receipt, every email, every scrap of proof. People lie. Paper doesn't. She'd say, her fingers tapping the manila folder she kept in the kitchen drawer. Back then, early in our marriage, I never thought I'd need that skill against him. The first year was a haze of soft morning light, mismatched mugs of coffee, and his hoodie wrapped around my shoulders, while we planned weekend trips we never quite took. He'd call me M in a voice that made the whole world sound like it was happening 2 feet away just for us. That memory came to me tonight like a ghost brushing past my chair. I watched him chew, swallow, sip water. He didn't ask about my day, didn't comment on the food, just existed beside me like an actor waiting for his next line. I thought about asking who'd been texting. I didn't. Questions or tells, and I wasn't ready to show my hand. Instead, I smiled, cut another bite, and forced myself to taste nothing. When he got up to take his plate to the sink, he moved like a man with time to spare, like he was in control. He turned on the faucet, let it run over the plate, and that's when I saw it, a faint shimmer in the microwave door's reflection. A shape again, this time closer to him, almost leaning in. My skin prickled, but I kept my face still. He glanced back, caught me looking at the microwave, and gave me a smile that didn't belong to him anymore. The second vibration came then muffled in his hoodie pocket. His hand pressed over it, and his smile widened like he was protecting a secret so good it was worth more than anything we'd ever shared. I reached for my wine, careful not to let my fingers shake. If he wanted me to trust him, I would. Just long enough for him to forget I was still watching. I don't follow people. I follow patterns. People lie. Patterns don't. The first crack was a charge on our joint account for a boutique hotel 3 towns over. He told me he was at a team building off-site. The receipt said otherwise. Then came the rideshare drop-offs at a different address from the one he'd leave for in the morning. Duplicate work dinners, showing up on his calendar when I knew the client had canceled. I didn't need to imagine who he was meeting. The facts lined themselves up like soldiers in a firing line. But knowing wasn't enough. I needed proof, tangible, irrefutable, the kind of thing even his lies couldn't twist. It came faster than I expected. He'd forgotten to unlink a shared photo album from his cloud account. I opened it on my lunch break expecting vacation shots from years ago, and instead found time-stamped photos, a corner booth in a dimly lit restaurant, his hand holding a wine glass, her face reflected in the window beside him. Always reflected, never fully visible, as if she knew how to hide in plain sight. The messages were next, buried under a bland contact name, Paul W., who texts Paul W. things like, "Can't stop thinking about last night," or "The way you looked at me in the hallway." God, it was enough to break me. But the next discovery didn't just break me, it rebuilt me into something colder. I was looking for hotel confirmations in his email when I found a folder named Tax Backup. I almost didn't click it. Inside were documents that didn't make sense, draft HR complaints with my name on them, altered budget sheets that looked like they'd been pulled from my company's internal system emails I'd never sent but signed with my name. All designed to look legitimate. All designed to destroy me. And then there was the list, a single page titled Rollout. Dates. Initials I didn't recognize. The last line, "Once this is done, she'll lose everything." I stared at the screen until my eyes stung. It wasn't just an affair. It was a coordinated takedown. I could almost hear them in my head, his voice low, her sharper, slicing through the air. Planning not just to leave me, but to erase me. That night, lying awake beside him, I heard it again. Not their voices, something else. At first, I thought it was the AC kicking on, but it clicked twice, then stopped like the house itself had decided to hold its breath. In the dark, my mind replayed the phrase from that list, "Lose everything." I remembered the first time he flinched when I touched his shoulder. It had been months ago, just after he'd come home late, smelling faintly of perfume I didn't own. I told myself it was stress. We all build little lies to survive the bigger ones. But now I couldn't unsee the pattern, the lies, the paper trail, the reflection in the glass. I took screenshots, printed copies, tucked them into the same kind of manila folder my mother once kept in the kitchen drawer. I labeled it in pencil just a single letter, AR. Revenge record I didn't decide in that moment. When I checked the metadata on the folder, a detail froze me. It had been created on my birthday, not as a coincidence, as a gift to themselves. That's when the fear burned away. What was left wasn't rage exactly, it was precision. They thought they'd planned for everything. They hadn't planned for me to find it. Once I knew, I couldn't unknow. Every movement, every conversation, every absence slotted neatly into the architecture of their plan. It wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about strategy. And they were good at it. Too good. From what I pieced together, the first step was to flip the script. Make it look like I was the unfaithful one. I found staged photos blurry enough to be plausible, sharp enough to identify me. Only it wasn't me. The woman in the shots had my haircut, my build, even wore a jacket that had gone missing from my closet months ago. The photos were stored alongside emails, drafts addressed to a coworker of mine, suggestive in tone, each ending mid-sentence, like they'd been interrupted while forging them. The second step was reputational ruin. An email supposedly from my account that I knew would violate confidentiality agreements. It was saved unsent like a loaded weapon, waiting for the right moment. Another file contained performance concerns, dated in advance as if HR had already decided the verdict. Step 3 was isolation. If I lost my job, my professional network, my credibility, I'd have no ground to stand on. They'd seed rumors quietly, let them grow like mold in a damp basement until no one wanted to be in the same room with me. Their timeline was organized into phases, and in their private notes, they referred to the next move as phase 2. I found the chats between them, him and her, the woman I'd only seen in reflections. They used pet names so saccharine I almost gagged, but the underlying tone was sharp. She was the strategist, he was the execution. Together, they were meticulous. So I became meticulous too. I started logging everything, times, dates, what they wore, even the subtle shifts in their body language. I laughed at his jokes when I had to. I responded to her texts, the friendly ones, without a flicker of suspicion. I let them believe I was exactly what they wanted me to be, oblivious. It's incredible what you can learn when people think you're not paying attention. One detail stood out, something so small, it might have been meaningless if I weren't me. Across several files buried in casual sentences was a repeated phrase, little swan, little swan. It appeared in a voice note he sent her in the subject line of an email draft and even in the memo line of a small bank transfer. It was deliberate, like a private passphrase. One night I tried it on his tablet. The lock screen slid away, revealing a voice memo. His voice low and excited, launch date 3 weeks. After that, it's all ours. My stomach went cold, but my mind sharpened. The phrase was more than a code, it was a key. If I could prove its relevance, it could tie every piece of their conspiracy together. I remembered something my mother used to tell me, don't scream. Record. So I did. I recorded everything, screenshots, backups, voice memos, copied onto a hidden drive. I created my own phases, not to defend myself, but to dismantle theirs. The night I unlocked that voice memo, I heard the hallway hum again, the one that had unnerved me before. A steady, low vibration that cut off mid-breath, leaving a silence so deep it pressed against my ears. I looked toward the dark kitchen, where the microwave's reflective door caught the faintest movement. It wasn't him, and it wasn't me. From that point on, every interaction was a duel fought in smiles and small talk. I wore calm like it was stitched into my skin. They couldn't know I was holding pieces of their puzzle pieces sharp enough to cut. At breakfast, he asked if I'd slept well. I said yes, though. My eyes burned from hours of sifting through his files. When I mentioned a new compliance policy at work, he corrected me, adding a detail that wasn't public yet. I laughed it off like I hadn't just caught him confirming he had access to information he shouldn't. The lover, Sloane. I'd finally learned her name, made herself known without ever saying my name. Once in the elevator, her perfume lingered long after she stepped off its sweet note, clinging to the air like a taunt. I caught her reflection in the mirrored panel, standing closer than she had any reason to, but when I turned, the space was empty. At home, nights grew heavier. The washing machine started a new ritual, one loud knock from the drum, at exactly 3:11 a.m., 3 nights in a row. I timed it. Same minute, same single sound, like it was keeping score. He must have noticed the stillness I carried because he started performing more. Casual touches on my shoulder. Questions about my day. Overcompensations, all of them. I'd answer evenly, watch his eyes dart to mine for signs of cracks. In public, I let them think they were winning. Sloane would smile at me like she'd already inherited my life. I'd smile back like I was the one giving it to her. Then the envelope arrived. No return address, just my name, scrawled in uneven ink. Inside was a single metal key, blank uncut. I held it in my palm, cold and weightless, wondering if it was a message from them or someone else entirely. Either way, it was meant to unsettle me. And it did, but not in the way they hoped. It confirmed that there were more players in this game than I'd accounted for. I left the key on the kitchen counter. That night, he saw it, picked it up, turned it over like he was trying to remember where he'd seen it before. He didn't ask, neither did I. The next morning, I set my coffee on the table and without thinking, I whispered to myself, little swan, little swan. His head jerked up so fast the chair legs scraped the floor. Sorry, he asked. Nothing, I said, sipping my coffee, just thinking out loud. His eyes lingered on me for a beat too long before he stood and left the room. That was the thing about pretending to be clueless. You could see the exact moment someone started to wonder if you weren't. They chose their stage carefully, a place where they thought I couldn't touch them. A neighborhood fundraiser at the local arts center. Soft lighting, live music, champagne flutes glinting under chandeliers. Everyone dressed just sharp enough to remember they were being watched. I arrived alone. He was already there, laughing at something Sloane whispered, his hand resting casually at the small of her back. I moved through the crowd like I belonged somewhere better. Their plan was obvious once I saw the props. A friend of mine, really one of theirs, was meant to call me by Sloane's name loudly enough for a nearby photographer to catch my reaction. Meanwhile, an incriminating text they'd planted on my phone would be discovered by another mutual acquaintance who'd accidentally borrowed it for a group selfie. The idea was to make me look jealous, unstable, maybe even dangerous. But they didn't know I'd checked the mic on the podium before the speeches started, or that it was live, quietly feeding into the room's speakers just below the music's volume. I waited until they were close enough for their voices to mingle with mine. Then I began not accusations, not threats, just dates, places, times, each one connected to a phase in their little operation. I said them like I was making polite conversation, my tone flat and unshakable. June 4th, boutique hotel room. 312, I said, smiling faintly. Funny how the billing address was ours. Sloane's glass stopped midair. July 19th, draft HR complaint version. 3 metadata still shows your initials. You might want to fix that before phase 3. He froze completely, his fingers tightening on her back. The DJ switched songs at that moment, dropping the volume just enough for the words to slip clean into the air. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Faces shifted not into shock, but into calculation. People were connecting dots I hadn't even planned on connecting tonight. The room felt colder somehow. The chandelier lights seemed too bright, too revealing. Even the hum from the speakers had a hollow, almost metallic edge, like we were inside a giant empty shell. Sloane tried to smile again, but it twitched at the edges. He let go of her entirely. I leaned in just enough for only them to hear, holding up a small black remote they hadn't seen before. This, I said softly, is my phase 3. They didn't ask what it did. I didn't tell them. That was the point. By the time I walked away, the crowd had parted, not because I'd raised my voice, but because they understood something had shifted. The balance was gone. The upper hand no longer belonged to them. Behind me, the music picked back up, but I swear I could still hear their silence, thick, ragged, and afraid. They wanted a war. I decided to give them one on my terms. The trick was never to act like I'd started it. The trick was to make it look like their own plan had turned on them. Step 1 was easy. I packaged every file, every screenshot, every audio clip into a neat, anonymous compliance packet. Nothing dramatic, just facts, metadata, timelines, and the damning little swan phrase threaded through every piece. I didn't send it to my company. I sent it to theirs. Within a week, a routine internal audit was launched. Nothing public yet, but I could feel the static in the air every time his phone buzzed and he ignored it. Sloane's smile started looking glued on brittle at the edges. Step 2 was more delicate. HR inquiries are like spider webs. They pull on threads you didn't know were connected. I made sure the inquiry into Sloane's expense reports landed exactly where she couldn't explain it away. Business dinners charged on weekends, travel receipts that didn't match meeting schedules. Her confidence began to fray. But that was just the scaffolding. The real architecture of my revenge was psychological. The first gift arrived at her office, 2 tickets to the very boutique hotel she and my husband had used. No note, no return address, just the exact dates they'd stayed there printed on the reservation confirmation. Perfectly legal, perfectly horrifying in its implication. For him, it was subtler. One morning, he found a children's book in our mailbox, The Little Swan Who Forgot Her Name. Inside on the title page, I'd written, launch date postponed. No signature, no handwriting he could prove was mine. Then came the messages, not threats, just echoes. A novelty coffee mug appeared in their office kitchen with the words, "She'll never see this coming," printed in cheerful pink font. An inside joke they'd thought was theirs alone, now hanging in plain sight for anyone to see. I started showing up places without warning, always where they were, but never approaching. A grocery store aisle, the far end of a bar, reflected in a shop window across the street. I didn't speak, didn't even look directly at them. I just existed in their periphery, an outline they couldn't scrub away. Nights took on a different weight. I'd lie in bed listening for the washing machine's 3:11 knock. Some nights it came. Some nights it didn't. Those were the worst because then I knew it wasn't the machine making the sound. One evening, I followed the sound into the hallway. It stopped the second I stepped on the cold tile. The hum of the AC felt too steady, like it was masking something else. In the microwave's black reflection, for just a fraction of a second, I saw 3 shapes instead of 2 me, and behind me 2 others, one taller, one small leaning. I didn't turn around. I just walked back to bed and slept with the lights on. The final step came when I used the blank key. It didn't fit anything in the house. It fit a storage locker 3 miles away, rented under an alias I recognized as his. Inside were 3 banker boxes. 2 were filled with files, receipts, and backups of the forged documents they'd planned to use against me. The 3rd was labeled with my maiden name. I didn't take anything. I photographed every page, every scrap, every post-it note, then left it all exactly as I'd found it. I wanted them to wonder if I'd been there. I wanted them to feel the floorboards shift under their feet every time they thought about it. That night, I left the key on his pillow. No note, just metal cold and waiting. By the end of the month, the cracks were too deep for them to hide. His phone was never silent. Sloan stopped making eye contact in public. They'd begun to distrust each other, whispering in corners, but never quite close enough to be heard. And me, I stayed calm. I kept receipts. I smiled over burnt toast. I let them imagine what I might do next because the truth was simpler and more frightening. I didn't have to do anything at all. The beauty of revenge isn't in the blow you strike. It's in the silence afterward, the space where the other person wonders if it's really over. And with them, it never would be. Fallout doesn't explode. It settles, a fine dust over everything they touch. The routine audit turned into interviews, not mine, theirs. His calendar filled with sudden check-ins. Sloan's access flickered permissions. Revoked, restored, revoked, again like a bad light. Colleagues stopped looping them into emails. Smiles became thin. Hallway conversations shortened to a nod. Money went tight. Our joint account showed small, nervous withdrawals, 20 here, 40 there, like someone testing whether the floor would hold. Then a larger transfer flagged and bounced tied to a side fund, labeled with a bland project name that matched Phase 2. He pretended not to notice. I pretended not to look. One afternoon, a message went around their office about unexpected discrepancies in expense reports. The memo didn't name anyone. It didn't have to. The silence afterward did more damage than words could. The incident, if that's what we're calling it, happened on a Thursday. Sloan's car sat angled wrong in the garage. Taillight cracked a skid that looked too neat to be accidental and too small to be truly dangerous. No injuries, no report, just a scene that said something went wrong. Her dash cam failed at the exact minute she was supposed to post a reveal on social, some polished version of the new life. The post didn't go up. By evening, the rumor was she'd slipped, dropped her phone, cursed loud enough to echo. That's all anyone could confirm. He called me at 3:11 a.m., the hour my house learned to knock. His voicemail held 6 seconds of static, and one sentence, careful and raw. Who else knows? I didn't answer. He called again at 3:12, then never left another message. By the weekend, invitations slowed. People chose new tables at lunch. I saw the first hairline crack in his rehearsed smile, the tremor under her perfected calm. They were learning what I already knew: you can repair stories. You can't repair doubt. Winning doesn't feel like victory. It feels like a room after everyone has left quiet cold, with the chairs pushed back just far enough to remind you of where people used to be. I kept my job. My name stayed clean. The folder labeled R was heavier now, but I didn't need to open it anymore. They stopped trying to hit back. Or maybe they were just waiting. Sleep didn't return. Night stretched into a gray kind of waking, my mind looping through possibilities. Every reflective surface felt off. A fraction of a second slower to match my movements, like the image was thinking about whether to follow me at all. The package arrived on a Tuesday morning. Brown paper, no return address, light enough to feel empty. Inside was a photograph dated 6 months before any of this began. My husband, Sloan, and Maya. Maya, my closest friend, the one who told me to text her when I got home so I know you're safe. The 3 of them sat at a bar I'd never been to, glasses raised, leaning in like they were already a team. Beneath the photo was a burner phone. It had 3 saved voicemails. The first was his voice, steady and calm, mapping out Phase 1. The second was Sloan, brisk and impatient, talking about timelines. The third was both of them laughing about a draft complaint I hadn't seen. The fourth slot was empty, labeled only Phase 3 Emma. I held the phone like it might bite. That night, I poured a glass of wine and sat in the kitchen, lights low. The house felt different, hollow-stretched. At 3:11 a.m., the knock came. Just once. I went into the hallway. The air was heavier there, thick with something I couldn't name. The washer wasn't running. The sound had come anyway. In the microwave's black door, I saw them, not just him and Sloane, but Maya too. 3 silhouettes standing behind me, still as mannequins. I didn't turn around. The burner phone lit up in my hand. A new message. The preview said only she saw it coming. I stood there until the screen went dark, until the silence settled back into the walls. The game wasn't over. Maybe it never would be.